on the vast, windswept expanse of Salisbury Plain in the English county of Wiltshire, a circle of silent stone giants stands against the sky. For millennia, these stones have guarded their secrets, their weathered faces bearing witness to the passing of seasons and the rise and fall of civilizations. They are the remnants of a world that vanished more than 5,000 years ago, a testament to a people who left behind no written word, only this enduring, enigmatic monument. It's a place that draws people from all over the world, even now. It makes you wonder where you are all listening from today, and what time it is in your part of the world. Please do let us know in the comments, and if you enjoy unraveling the great mysteries of the past, be sure to subscribe so you're notified when we release new stories like this one. The structure we call Stonehenge is a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, a complex arrangement of massive sarsen stones and smaller, mysterious bluestones, meticulously shaped and raised into place with a precision that still baffles modern engineers. The largest of these upright stones weigh as much as 25 tons, which is roughly 22.5 metric tons, and soar to over 4 meters, or 13 feet, in height. They were not simply placed on the landscape. They were hewn from quarries hundreds of kilometers away, transported over land and water, and assembled into a celestial theater of lintels and trilithons. This was not the work of a single generation, but a monumental project that evolved over a period of at least 1,500 years, each new phase adding another layer of complexity and meaning. Our story is not just about the stones themselves, but about the people who conceived them, who poured their beliefs, their knowledge, and their very existence into this sacred ground. We will journey with them as they quarry and haul these colossal megaliths, explore the villages where they lived and feasted, and attempt to decipher the celestial alignments that connect their world to the movements of the sun and the moon. To truly understand Stonehenge, we must first journey back to a time before the first stone was ever raised, to a landscape that was already ancient and sacred to the people who inhabited it. Long before it became a stage for colossal stones, the Salisbury Plain was a vast, open expanse of chalk downland, sculpted by the retreating glaciers of the last great ice age, which had ended some 11,700 years ago. As the climate warmed, this landscape, initially a sparse tundra, was slowly colonized by life. First came the hardy grasses and pioneering shrubs, followed by sprawling forests of pine and hazel. Herds of aurochs, the immense wild ancestors of modern cattle, roamed these woodlands alongside red deer and wild boar, creating a rich and dynamic ecosystem. Into this world, as early as 10,000 years ago, walked the first people to leave their mark on the land. These were Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, small nomadic bands who moved with the seasons, following the herds and harvesting the wild bounty of the plain. For thousands of years, their presence was light and ephemeral, leaving behind little more than the scattered flint tools they used for hunting and butchering. Yet, even in this distant past, there are hints that this particular area held a special significance. In the very place where the Stonehenge car park now sits, archaeologists discovered a series of large pits precisely arranged in a line. Within them were the remnants of massive pine posts, each nearly a meter or 3 feet in diameter, erected around 10,000 years ago. These were not the supports for a dwelling. They were monumental in their own right, totem-like markers in a clearing. Their purpose is lost to time, but their existence tells us that this was not just a hunting ground. It was a place where people gathered, a place they marked as significant, thousands of years before the first earth was turned for the monument we know today. A profound change swept across Britain around 6,000 years ago, during the Neolithic period. New people arrived from continental Europe, bringing with them a revolutionary way of life: farming. They carried the seeds of the first domesticated wheat and barley, and they drove herds of cattle, sheep, and pigs. This agricultural revolution transformed the landscape and the very fabric of society. People began to settle in one place, clearing the ancient forests to create pastures and fields. With this new, more sedentary existence came the impulse to build, to create permanent monuments that spoke of their connection to the land, their community, and their ancestors. All across the Salisbury Plain, the evidence of this new era began to appear. They built great communal tombs known as long barrows, earthen mounds covering timber, and stone chambers where the bones of the dead were laid to rest. These were not just graves. They were powerful symbols of lineage and permanence, houses for the spirits of the ancestors who watched over the living. And then, sometime before the first circle at Stonehenge was conceived, these early farmers undertook a project of almost unimaginable scale. They created the Stonehenge cursus. The name is a curious accident of history, bestowed in the 18th century by the antiquarian William Stukely, who mistakenly believed it to be a Roman racetrack, or cursus in Latin. In reality, it is a vast enclosure consisting of 2 parallel banks and ditches running for nearly 3 kilometers, or almost 2 miles, across the landscape. It is roughly 100 meters, or about 330 feet, wide, and its construction would have involved the excavation of tens of thousands of tons of earth and chalk, all dug by hand with antler picks and the shoulder blades of cattle. The true purpose of the cursus remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the region. It was not a defensive structure, nor was it a road. It seems to have been a ceremonial way, a defined path that separated the sacred from the profane. Perhaps it was used for processions, a ritual journey that mirrored the path of the sun or the transition from life to death. It stretches across the landscape on a rough east-west alignment, with its eastern end pointing towards the spot on the horizon where the sun rises on the spring and autumn equinoxes. Whatever its specific function, the cursus proves that the people of this era possessed the social organization, the shared belief, and the sheer manpower to radically reshape their environment for ceremonial purposes. They saw the plain not just as a place to live, but as a canvas upon which to project their cosmology. The cursus established the area as a vast ritual theater, setting the stage for the even more ambitious project that was to follow. And so, around 5,100 years ago, the first chapter in the long story of Stonehenge itself began. It did not begin with stones. It began, like the cursus, with the earth itself. Using those same simple yet effective tools of antler and bone, the Neolithic builders excavated a massive circular ditch and bank, creating an enclosure measuring approximately 110 meters, or 360 feet, in diameter. The ditch was not a continuous trench, but was dug in a series of segments, leaving two primary entrances. The main entrance was a wide gap on the northeast side, while a smaller opening faced to the south. The material dug from the ditch, brilliant white chalk from deep beneath the topsoil, was piled up to form two banks, one on the inner and one on the outer edge of the circle. When it was new, this first Stonehenge would have been a stunning sight. A perfect ring of gleaming white chalk that would have been visible for miles across the green landscape. It was a declaration, a deliberate act of separating this piece of ground from the rest of the world, marking it as a special, sacred place. This was not just an enclosure. It was conceived from its very inception as a domain for the dead. Just inside the inner bank, the builders dug a precise circle of 56 large pits, evenly spaced in a ring. For centuries, these pits were a puzzle. They were rediscovered in the 17th century by the antiquarian John Aubrey and have been known as the Aubrey holes ever since. Early theories suggested they once held a circle of timber posts or perhaps even stones that were later removed. But modern archaeological techniques have revealed their true and solemn purpose. Excavations of the Aubrey holes have yielded the cremated remains of at least 63 different individuals, men, women, and even children. It is now clear that from its earliest days, Stonehenge was a cemetery, perhaps the first major cremation cemetery in Britain. These were not the graves of ordinary people. To be buried within this great ceremonial enclosure must have been a high honor, reserved for a ruling elite, a priestly class, or the leaders of a powerful dynasty. For a period of 500 years, this earth and chalk circle was the final resting place for generations of a community's most important ancestors. The act of cremation and burial here was a way of tethering the spirits of the dead to this sacred spot, creating a powerful link between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. And crucially, that wide northeastern entrance did more than just welcome the living. It was carefully aligned with the heavens. Standing in the center of the circle on the longest day of the year, one would see the sun rise directly over a point on the horizon, framed perfectly by the entranceway. This celestial connection, established at the very dawn of the monument's existence, reveals that this place was about more than just honoring the dead. It was about connecting their world to the cosmic cycles of the sun, the moon, and the seasons. A theme that would be amplified in spectacular fashion when the first great stones began their long and arduous journey to this sacred circle of chalk. For half a millennium, the great white circle of chalk stood as a monument to the dead and a calendar for the living, its earthen form a constant presence on the Salisbury Plain. The traditions of burial and ceremony continued for generations, a silent pact between the people and their sacred ground. But then, around 4,500 years ago, a new wave of belief, or perhaps a new surge of ambition, swept through the community. The focus of the monument was about to shift dramatically, from the earth of the plain itself to stone brought from a land of myth and legend. This was the beginning of the second great phase of Stonehenge, and it involved a feat of logistics and labor so extraordinary that it remains a source of awe and debate to this day. The decision was made to erect a circle of stones, but not from the local sarsen sandstone that littered the nearby downs. For this new, more potent version of their temple, the builders sought something unique, something imbued with a power that could only come from a great distance. They chose a collection of igneous rocks, primarily dolerites and rhyolites, which we now collectively call the blue stones. The name is a little deceptive. In the flat light of an English day, they appear a mottled grayish green. But when freshly broken, or when wet with rain, they reveal a deep, celestial blue hue, often speckled with startling white inclusions of feldspar. To the Neolithic mind, these were no ordinary rocks. They were stones with a history, stones that came from a special, powerful place. That place was the Preseli Hills in Pembrokeshire, in the far west of Wales. Modern geology has allowed us to pinpoint the exact quarries, the specific rocky outcrops of Carn Godog and Craig Ros I Phelan, from which these stones were hewn. This discovery presents a staggering logistical problem. The Preseli Hills are over 240 kilometers, or roughly 150 miles, away from Salisbury Plain. No other megalithic monument in Europe was built using stones transported over such a vast distance. This was not a matter of convenience. It was a deliberate, monumental pilgrimage of stone. The first challenge was to extract the stones, some of which weighed up to 4 tons, which is about 3.6 metric tons. The builders possessed no metal tools. Their technology was of stone, wood, and bone. They were, however, expert geologists. They understood the natural structure of the rock, identifying vertical fissures and weaknesses. Into these cracks, they would have hammered wooden wedges. By pouring water onto the wedges, they could make the wood swell with immense, unstoppable force, cracking the megalithic pillars away from the rock face. It was a slow, patient, and incredibly dangerous process, requiring immense coordination and a deep, practical knowledge of the natural world. Once a pillar was freed, the even greater challenge of transport began. Archaeologists have debated the exact route for decades, but it most likely involved a combination of land and water travel. The first leg of the journey would have been overland, moving the colossal stones from the high ridges of the Preseli Hills down to the coast. This was a brutal, muscle-powered endeavor. The most likely method involved placing the stones onto wooden sledges, which were then hauled by teams of hundreds of people over a trackway of rolling logs. Every hill, every stream, every patch of marshy ground would have presented a formidable obstacle, overcome only by sheer manpower and unwavering determination. It is a journey that would have taken months, perhaps even years, to complete. Upon reaching the coast at Milford Haven, a vast natural harbor, the builders would have faced the most perilous stage of the entire undertaking. They needed to take their precious cargo to the sea. They would have constructed massive rafts, perhaps by lashing several large log boats together and creating a stable wooden platform on top. Loading a 4-ton stone onto such a vessel was a high-risk operation in itself. But then they had to navigate the treacherous waters of the Bristol Channel, a stretch of sea with the second highest tidal range in the entire world. The currents are ferocious and the weather unpredictable. The loss of a single stone would have been a catastrophic blow, not just in terms of the immense labor wasted, but perhaps as a terrible omen from the gods or spirits they were trying to appease. Assuming they successfully navigated the channel, the journey would have continued up the River Avon, through the area where the modern city of Bristol now stands. From there, they would have followed a series of rivers and streams, interspersed with more grueling overland stages, dragging their cargo ever eastward. The final leg of this epic journey would have brought them up the River Wylye to within a few kilometers of their final destination. The arrival of the first blue stone at the Stonehenge site must have been a moment of profound triumph and religious significance. A piece of the sacred Welsh mountains had been physically brought to the heart of their ceremonial landscape. Over time, as many as 80 of these blue stones completed this incredible journey. They were then dressed or shaped using stone hammers and erected at the center of the ancient earthwork circle. They were arranged in a double arc, or perhaps a horseshoe shape, creating a new and dramatic focal point within the monument. This act transformed Stonehenge. It was no longer just an open-air cemetery defined by a chalk bank. It was now a true stone temple, a house for the spirits built from foreign, magical stone. Around this same time, another significant stone was added. Just outside the northeastern entrance, along the alignment of the summer solstice sunrise, the builders erected the heel stone. It is a large, unshaped sarsen, a local stone weighing around 35 tons, or 31.5 metric tons. It acted as a foresight, a permanent marker for the most important solar event of the year. The blue stone circle, combined with the heel stone, solidified the monument's role as a celestial observatory. But this remarkable achievement, the creation of a stone circle of unique and sacred rocks, was only a prelude. The ancestors who had brought the blue stones from the distant mountains had set a new precedent for monumental ambition, one that their descendants were about to eclipse in a way that would defy imagination. This new vision, born around 4,500 years ago, was for a structure of an entirely different order of magnitude, one built not of stones the size of men, but of stones the size of gods. The delicate blue stone arcs were to be dwarfed, enclosed by a new and far more powerful circle. For this, the builders turned their attention not to the distant, mystical mountains of Wales, but to a source of stone much closer to home, yet infinitely more challenging. They sought the sarsens, colossal blocks of silicified sandstone left scattered across the Marlborough Downs, a landscape of rolling hills located about 32 kilometers, or some 20 miles, to the north of Stonehenge. The name sarsen is thought to derive from the term Saracen stone, a medieval phrase for anything foreign or pagan. These stones are the incredibly hard remnants of sand deposited 60 million years ago, cemented together by silica into a rock that is tougher and more durable than most granite. They are the true giants of the Salisbury Plain, and the builders of Stonehenge now intended to tame them. Unlike the bluestones, which were quarried from living rock faces, the sarsens were found as individual boulders, partially buried in the soil, the last vestiges of a sandstone cap that had otherwise eroded away millions of years before. The first task was selection. The builders could not simply take any stone. They needed monoliths of specific dimensions, some for the uprights of a great outer circle, others for the even larger uprights of a central horseshoe, and still others for the lintels that would cap them. This implies a master plan, an architectural blueprint that existed in the minds of the builders before a single stone was moved. Once a suitable stone was identified, weighing anywhere from 20 to a staggering 50 tons, or about 45 metric tons, the colossal task of moving it began. The 32-kilometer journey from the Marlborough Downs to Stonehenge was shorter than the Bluestone pilgrimage, but the challenge was exponentially greater due to the sheer weight of the cargo. The sarsens were not dragged across the ground. They were most likely loaded onto immense wooden sledges and then hauled by hundreds, perhaps even more than 1,000, people pulling in unison on thick ropes woven from plant fibers or animal hide. Progress would have been agonizingly slow, a few hundred meters a day. The entire landscape between the downs and the monument site would have been transformed into a vast construction zone. Teams of workers would have been needed just to clear a path and lay down a track of logs to act as rollers. Others would have been tasked with preparing food and water for the haulers, making and mending the ropes, and repairing the constantly breaking sledges. This was a project that would have mobilized an entire society, a seasonal effort that may have spanned decades, all driven by a shared vision and a powerful, unquestioned authority. When these gargantuan stones finally arrived at the sacred circle, the work shifted from one of brute force to one of astonishing finesse and precision. These were not to be a ring of crude, unworked boulders. They were to be shaped, smoothed, and fitted together with a sophistication that was unparalleled in prehistoric Europe. The builders' only tools were stone hammers, heavy, rounded mauls made of sarsen or quartzite. With these, they began the laborious process of dressing the stones. For hour after hour, day after day, they would have pounded away at the surface of the megaliths, chipping off tiny fragments. This technique, known as pecking, gradually smoothed the rough faces of the stones, creating flat, even surfaces. The sheer number of man-hours required to shape a single sarsen is almost beyond comprehension. Yet the builders went even further, applying advanced principles of woodworking to the unforgiving medium of stone. For the great outer circle, each of the upright stones was painstakingly shaped to have two protrusions, or tenons, on its top surface. The lintel stones that would sit on top were then hollowed out, with two corresponding mortise holes, allowing them to slot into place like a giant interlocking toy. This mortise and tenon system made the structure incredibly stable, locking the lintels to the uprights and preventing them from shifting. For the continuous ring of lintels that capped the outer circle, they employed another clever technique: tongue and groove joints. One end of each lintel was carved with a vertical groove, while the other was shaped into a protruding tongue so that they slotted firmly into one another, creating an unbroken and robust circle of stone. Even more remarkably, the monument incorporates subtle optical refinements, architectural illusions, that suggest an incredibly sophisticated understanding of aesthetics and perspective. The uprights are not perfect rectangles. They are wider at the bottom and gently taper towards the top. This technique, known as entasis, fools the human eye, making the pillars appear straighter and taller than they actually are. It is a feature that would later be famously employed by the ancient Greeks in the Parthenon. Yet here it was, in a supposedly primitive society, thousands of years earlier. The lintels of the outer circle are not perfectly flat either. Each one is slightly curved, so that when placed together, they form a perfect, smooth circle, not a 30-sided polygon. Every single stone was a unique, custom-fitted piece of a monumental puzzle. And then came the final, seemingly impossible act, raising them into position. First, a massive pit was dug for each upright, with one side a gentle ramp, and the other a sheer vertical drop, often reinforced with a line of wooden stakes. The multi-ton sarsen was then levered and dragged until its base was positioned over the edge of the pit. With a tremendous, coordinated effort using levers and ropes, the stone was tipped into the hole, its base crashing against the stakes, which prevented it from sliding across. Then, with teams of hundreds of people pulling on ropes, likely with the aid of large timber A-frames acting as primitive cranes, the colossal stone was hauled into a perfectly vertical position. The pit was then immediately packed tight with rubble and chalk to secure it in place forever. Lifting the 10-ton lintels into place more than 4 meters or 13 feet off the ground was perhaps the greatest challenge of all. The most widely accepted theory is that the builders constructed enormous timber platforms or cribs, gradually raising the lintel inch by inch by levering it up and sliding more logs underneath. It would have been a slow, nerve-wracking process, requiring immense stability and patience. Finally, after weeks of effort, the lintel would have been high enough to be carefully maneuvered across the tops of the 2 uprights, its mortise holes lowered with millimeter precision onto the waiting tenons. The result of all this labor was the Stonehenge that has dominated our imagination for centuries. A complete outer circle of 30 sarsen uprights capped by a continuous ring of lintels, and inside it, a towering horseshoe of 5 independent structures called trilithons. Each trilithon consisted of 2 massive uprights with a single lintel on top. These were arranged in order of height, with the smallest pair standing about 6 meters or 20 feet tall, and the great trilithon at the head of the horseshoe soaring to a height of almost 7.5 meters or 24 feet above the ground. This was the architectural climax of the site, a temple of giants that enclosed the earlier, more delicate bluestone setting, creating a stunning interplay between the massive, pale gray sarsens and the smaller, darker stones from the Welsh mountains. The people who achieved this had created more than just a monument. They had sculpted the landscape and built a connection to the heavens in a language of pure stone. But what of the people themselves? The society that could speak such a language of pure stone? For all the monumental evidence they left on the landscape, they remain ghosts in their own story. A people without a written name, without a single recorded word to explain their motives. To understand them, we must become archaeologists of the spirit, sifting through the silent testimony of bone, pottery, and charcoal they left buried in the chalky soil. For centuries, the builders of Stonehenge were an enigma, their lives and homes seemingly vanished. The sheer scale of their achievement suggested a large, organized workforce, yet the surrounding plains revealed no trace of a city or even a substantial village from their time. The mystery remained until the dawn of the 21st century, when a remarkable discovery was made just a few kilometers or a couple of miles to the northeast of the Great Stone Circle. Here, within another vast prehistoric earthwork known as Durrington Walls, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a sprawling settlement, a place that was once home to the very people who raised the Sarsens. Durrington Walls is itself a massive henge, an enclosure encircled by a ditch and an outer bank, far larger in circumference than Stonehenge. But unlike its stony counterpart, this was not a place for the dead. This was the domain of the living. Excavations revealed the floors of hundreds, perhaps even 1,000, small houses, their presence marked by the post holes that once held their timber frames, and the clay floors that were baked hard by their central hearths. These were not the permanent dwellings of a year-round city, but rather the temporary homes of a massive seasonal gathering. The houses were made of wood and wattle and daub, built to last for a season, not for an eternity. This discovery immediately presented a powerful and beautiful symmetry. A village of wood for the living stood in dramatic contrast to the temple of stone for the ancestors. One was ephemeral, destined to rot and return to the earth, while the other was eternal, built to withstand the ages. The two sites are connected by the river Avon, which flows past them both. It is now believed that the river formed a ceremonial route, a sacred artery, linking the world of the living at Durrington Walls with the realm of the dead at Stonehenge. It was within the remains of this great settlement that the builders truly began to reveal themselves, not through their architecture, but through their appetites. Archaeologists unearthed a staggering quantity of animal bones, the remnants of gargantuan feasts. The primary animals on the menu were pigs and cattle, and the sheer volume of their remains points to a level of consumption far beyond simple subsistence. This was ritual feasting on an industrial scale. Analysis of the bones provided an astonishing insight into the nature of these gatherings. Chemical isotopes in the animals' teeth, which act as a geological signature of the water they drank as they grew, revealed that these animals had not been raised locally on the Salisbury Plain. They had been brought from every corner of Britain, from the highlands of Scotland, the valleys of Wales, and the hills of northern England. This was not a local festival. This was a national, or perhaps even international, pilgrimage. People were traveling for hundreds of kilometers, driving their best livestock with them as a contribution to the great feast and as a source of labor for the great work. Further study of the pig bones revealed another crucial clue. The vast majority of them were slaughtered at around 9 months of age. This is a very specific time frame, and it points to a carefully timed seasonal event. A pig born in the spring would be perfectly fattened for a feast in the middle of winter. This strongly suggests that the main gatherings, the great feasts, and the heaviest work on the monument took place around the time of the midwinter solstice. A picture begins to emerge of a vibrant, bustling, and surprisingly sophisticated society. For a few weeks each winter, the plain would come alive with thousands of people. They would gather at Durrington walls, building their temporary homes, feasting, celebrating, and reaffirming social bonds. This was the powerhouse, the social engine that drove the construction of Stonehenge. It was here that the community was forged, and the collective will was focused. Then, as the shortest day of the year approached, they would embark on a solemn procession. They would journey down to the River Avon and travel downstream, perhaps by boat, perhaps along a ceremonial avenue that once lined its banks, until they came to the great stone temple. At Stonehenge, as the sun set in the southwest, its last rays would have shone directly through the heart of the main axis of the monument, through the great trilithon, illuminating a path for the ancestors. It was a moment of profound cosmic connection, a ritual that linked the living, the dead, and the heavens. The society that could organize such an event was clearly not a simple, egalitarian group of farmers. It was a stratified society, with powerful leaders, be they chiefs, kings, or a priestly class, who could command the loyalty and labor of thousands of people from across the land. There would have been architects with a profound understanding of geometry and astronomy, and master craftspeople who knew the secrets of shaping and moving stone. Beneath them were the masses, the farmers and herders who provided the muscle, who willingly gave their time and their resources to a project that was bigger than any single individual. Further evidence for the existence of a powerful elite comes from a burial discovered near Stonehenge, a grave that is arguably the richest and most significant of its time ever found in Britain. He is known as the Amesbury Archer, a man who lived and died around 4,300 years ago, precisely when the sarsen stones were being erected. He was buried with over 100 objects, an unprecedented collection of grave goods that marked him as a person of immense importance. He had with him a set of finely made flint arrowheads, stone wrist guards for archery, several copper knives, and most remarkably, a pair of small gold hair tresses, the very first gold objects ever found in Britain. This was a man of immense wealth and status. But the most startling revelation came from an analysis of the enamel on his teeth. The chemical signature showed that he had not grown up on the chalklands of Wiltshire. He had spent his childhood in the foothills of the Alps, in what is now modern-day Switzerland or Austria. This powerful, wealthy man was an immigrant, drawn from the heart of continental Europe to this sacred site in southern England. He may have been a master metalworker, bringing the secrets of the new Bronze Age with him, or a religious leader who brought new beliefs. His presence proves that Stonehenge was not a remote, isolated monument. It was a place of international renown, a cultural and religious center that drew influential people from hundreds of miles away, uniting a diverse and widespread community in a single, monumental purpose. That monumental purpose, the spiritual glue that held this diverse society together, was written not in words, but in the very alignment of the stones, a silent language directed towards the sky. From its very first incarnation as an earthwork enclosure, Stonehenge was oriented upon the heavens. But with the erection of the great Sarsen trilithons, this celestial connection was transformed into a breathtakingly dramatic piece of sacred theater. The entire monument was meticulously designed to frame the two most significant turning points of the solar year: the solstices. The main axis, the line that runs from the southwest to the northeast, passing through the center of the Great Trilithon and out through the main entrance, points directly to the position on the horizon where the sun rises on the longest day of the year, the summer solstice. An observer, standing in the center of the circle on that magical dawn, would see the sun appear as a brilliant orb, perfectly cradled in the gap marked by the distant heel-stone. It was, and still is, a moment of profound cosmic order, a reaffirmation that the light and life of summer had returned. For an agricultural society, this was the zenith of the year, a moment of celebration for the power that made their crops grow and their herds flourish. For centuries, this summer solstice alignment dominated our understanding of Stonehenge. But the archaeological evidence from Durrington Walls, with its story of massive midwinter feasts, compelled researchers to look again, to turn 180 degrees and face the other direction. When they did, they found an alignment that was perhaps even more significant to the monument's builders. On the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice, the same central axis provides a perfect frame for the setting sun. From the direction of the main entrance, one would watch the sun descend, its dying light shining through the narrow gap between the two great uprights of the Great Trilithon. This was not a celebration of light and life, but a solemn observance of darkness and death. It was the moment the sun reached its weakest point, the day the world was plunged into its longest night. This was the time for the ancestors. It is now believed that this winter solstice sunset was the primary ceremonial event of the year, the time when the barrier between the world of the living and the realm of the spirits was at its thinnest. The great feasting at Durrington Walls would culminate in a procession to the stone temple, where the people would bear witness to the sun's symbolic death, its entry into the underworld, a journey that mirrored the passage of their own ancestors. This dual alignment, celebrating both the birth of light in summer and its death in winter, reveals a sophisticated duality in the beliefs of the builders. But was the monument's purpose limited to just the sun? In the 18th century, the antiquarian William Stukeley was the first to seriously document the summer solstice alignment, correctly identifying Stonehenge as a temple oriented on the sun, even if he mistakenly attributed its construction to the much later Druids. For 2 centuries, his solar theory was the accepted wisdom. But in the 1960s, a new and revolutionary idea was proposed by the British-American astronomer Gerald Hawkins. Armed with the power of a new generation of computers, Hawkins meticulously analyzed the positions of the stones and their various sightlines. He claimed to have found not just solar alignments, but dozens of lunar ones as well. He argued that Stonehenge was far more than just a simple solar calendar. It was a sophisticated astronomical observatory, an analog computer built of stone, capable of tracking the complex cycles of the moon and, most astonishingly, of predicting eclipses. Hawkins's theory was electrifying. The idea that prehistoric people, without writing or advanced mathematics, could have created such a device was a radical challenge to conventional views of the past. He proposed that the 56 Aubrey holes, that enigmatic circle of pits from the monument's very first phase, were not just graves, but were used as a counting device. By moving markers, perhaps stones or wooden posts, around the circle in a specific sequence, the builders could have kept track of the 19-year cycle of the moon and the 18.6-year period over which the moon's rising and setting points oscillate along the horizon. This, he claimed, would have allowed them to forecast the dangerous and terrifying times when the sun or the moon would be devoured, events that were almost universally seen in the ancient world as terrible omens. The theory was compelling, recasting the builders of Stonehenge not as primitive farmers, but as brilliant Neolithic astronomers, the intellectual equals of the later Babylonians or Mayans. However, Hawkins's Stonehenge decoded theory has been a subject of intense debate ever since. Many archaeologists and other astronomers are skeptical. They point out that with so many stones and potential sightlines, it is possible to find apparent alignments purely by chance. Furthermore, the millennia of weathering, shifting, and human interference have altered the exact positions of the stones, making any claim of pinpoint accuracy difficult to prove. The critics argue that while the major solar alignments of the solstices are undeniable and were clearly intentional, the more complex lunar and eclipse prediction functions might be a modern pattern imposed upon the ancient stones. The consensus today lies somewhere in the middle. While Stonehenge may not have been a precise eclipse predictor in the way Hawkins envisioned, its connection to the moon is still taken seriously. The moon is the second great light in the sky, its phases a measure of the month, its movements a subtle counterpoint to the sun's annual journey. A monument so dedicated to the sun would almost certainly have incorporated the moon into its cosmology as well. But to see Stonehenge only as an astronomical device is to miss its deeper, more human meaning. It was first and foremost a temple, a sacred space. Yet its sacredness was deeply practical. For a people whose lives were governed by the seasons, a reliable calendar was not an academic curiosity. It was a tool for survival. The movements of the sun marked the correct times for planting and for harvesting, for moving herds to new pastures, and for preparing for the lean months of winter. The monument was a perpetual almanac, its great stones a guarantee of cosmic order in an uncertain world. It reassured the people that after the cold and darkness of winter, the sun would always return to its summer strength. Beyond the sky and the calendar, there may have been other layers of meaning, other sources of power. Some researchers have focused on the unique properties of the bluestones, suggesting that their epic journey from Wales was motivated by more than just their celestial color. The Preseli Hills are a land rich in sacred springs and a long tradition of healing. Intriguingly, many of the bluestones are dolerites, which, when struck, produce a clear, bell-like ringing sound. It has been suggested that Stonehenge may have been a place of healing, where the sick were brought to be bathed in the magical sound of these ringing rocks, a cathedral of sound as well as light. This theory is supported by the discovery of numerous skeletons in the area from the Stonehenge period, showing signs of serious illness or injury. Individuals who may have made their own final pilgrimage to the stones in search of a miracle. Stonehenge was, therefore, not one thing, but many things at once. A tomb for the honored dead, a theater for the living, a calendar for the farmer, an observatory for the sky watcher, and a sanctuary for the sick. It was the center of their world because it was where all the worlds met, the earth beneath, the sky above, and the human community in between, all bound together in a universe of stone and light. But that universe of stone and light was never static. It was a living temple, and the beliefs of the people who worshipped within it continued to evolve, demanding new expressions in the sacred architecture. Not long after the monumental sarsens were raised, in a final feverish act of modification, the builders turned their attention once again to the enigmatic bluestones. The double arch that had stood at the monument's heart for generations was dismantled. The 80 or so stones that had made the epic journey from the Welsh mountains were uprooted and painstakingly rearranged. This was no act of desecration. It was a reconsecration, a refinement of the sacred space. They were now placed in the configuration that their weathered stumps and fallen remnants reveal to us today. An outer circle of smaller stones positioned just inside the great sarsen ring, and a more intimate horseshoe shape within the towering trilithons, mirroring the grander structure that enclosed it. At the very center of it all, at the focal point of the solar and ancestral alignments, a great slab of greenish-gray sandstone, brought all the way from the coasts of Milford Haven in Wales, was laid flat. We call it the altar stone. Whether it was ever used for sacrifice is a matter of pure speculation. But its placement at the heart of the temple suggests it was the ultimate focus of the rituals performed within. This final arrangement of the stones, completed around 3,600 years ago, marks the beginning of a profound cultural shift, a slow turning of the tide. The era of great communal construction was drawing to a close. A new age was dawning across Europe, an age defined not by stone, but by metal. The knowledge of bronze, a revolutionary alloy of copper and tin, was spreading across Britain. And with it came new people, new ideas, and new ways of honoring the dead. The focus of ritual life began to move away from the great collective temple and towards the individual. The landscape around Stonehenge, which had for centuries been the stage for the living, now became a vast and silent necropolis, the most concentrated cemetery of the Bronze Age in all of Britain. Instead of communal cremation within the henge, powerful new elites, chieftains, and warrior heroes demanded their own, more personal monuments. They were buried in single graves, often accompanied by magnificent treasures. The first bronze daggers, intricate gold ornaments, and beautifully crafted pottery beakers that give this new culture its name, the Beaker people. Over their graves, great conical mounds of earth and chalk were raised, the round barrows that still pockmark the Salisbury Plain today, each one a monument to a single powerful individual. Stonehenge was no longer a place to build. It was a place to be buried near. Its power was so immense that to have your final resting place within sight of its stones was the ultimate statement of status and connection to the divine. And within the stone circle itself, the great work faltered. Sometime after the blue stones were reset, a new and ambitious plan was conceived. 2 concentric circles of large pits were dug outside the Sarsen circle, one consisting of 30 pits, the other of 29. We call them the Y and Z holes. They are roughly the same size and depth as the sockets that hold the Sarsens, and it seems almost certain that they were intended to hold another ring of stones, or perhaps massive timber posts. Yet they were never filled. The pits were left open, and over the centuries they slowly silted up, empty sockets in the ground, the silent evidence of a grand design that was never realized. This was the final breath of the great construction project. The momentum that had driven generations to haul and shape stone for 1,000 years was finally exhausted. The resources, the social cohesion, or perhaps the religious conviction that had made the impossible possible, had finally waned. The great winter gatherings at Durrington Walls ceased. The hearths in the village of the living grew cold, and the wooden houses rotted back into the soil. The monument did not fall into ruin overnight. For centuries more, it remained a place of reverence, an ancient and hallowed landmark. But its central role in the life of the people faded. Rituals became smaller, more local. New temples were built in other places, and new beliefs took hold. And so, entropy began its slow reclamation. Sometime in the Bronze Age, the lintel from the top of the great trilithon, the very heart of the temple, cracked and fell. Later, the western upright of this same mighty structure gave way, sinking into the ground and taking its half of the broken lintel with it. The perfect symmetry was broken. The once pristine circle began its long transformation into a picturesque ruin. For over 1,000 years, it stood in this state of majestic decay, a landmark on a largely empty plain. The Romans came, building roads and villas nearby. They left offerings at the site, coins and pottery, suggesting they recognized it as a place of ancient British power, a native shrine to be respected. But its original purpose was entirely lost to them. After the legions departed, and the Roman province of Britannia fell into chaos, Stonehenge slipped from history and into myth. For 700 years, it stood silent through the so-called Dark Ages, its history forgotten, its name unrecorded. It re-emerges into the light of the written word in the early 12th century, when the historian Henry of Huntingdon, writing around the year 1130, included it in a list of the wonders of Britain, calling it Stonehenge, or the hanging stones. He marveled at how such massive stones had been raised so high, and confessed that no one knew by what means or for what purpose they had been built. It was a complete mystery, a work of giants from a lost age. A few decades later, this historical void was filled by one of the most imaginative and influential writers of the Middle Ages, Geoffrey of Monmouth. In his fantastically elaborate History of the Kings of Britain, a book that gave the world the first full account of King Arthur, Geoffrey provided a suitably epic origin story for the monument. He wrote that the stones were originally from Africa and had been brought to Ireland by a race of giants. There, they were set up in a circle called the Giants' Dance, and were said to have magical healing properties. After a great battle in which 460 British nobles were treacherously slain by the Saxon leader Hengist, the British king, Aurelius Ambrosius, wished to create a fitting memorial. He sought the advice of the most powerful sorcerer of the age, Merlin. It was Merlin who advised the king to bring the Giants' Dance from Ireland to the Salisbury Plain. When the king's soldiers failed to move the magical stones, Merlin used his arts and enchantments to transport them with ease. And so, in Geoffrey's telling, Stonehenge was rebuilt on its present site as a grand tomb for the murdered nobility. This dramatic and magical tale, linking the monument to the heroic age of Arthur and the wizardry of Merlin, would dominate the popular imagination for the next 500 years. The true story of the Neolithic farmers and their celestial temple was utterly lost, buried deeper than any bluestone, waiting for a new age of science and reason to begin the slow and patient work of excavation. That new age of reason began to dawn in the 17th century, a time of profound intellectual curiosity when the fantastical tales of Geoffrey of Monmouth began to be questioned by a new breed of scholars and thinkers. The first to turn a truly analytical eye upon Stonehenge was the architect Inigo Jones. Commissioned by King James I to investigate the monument, Jones conducted the first ever detailed survey of the stones. He measured their dimensions, mapped their layout, and was immediately struck by their classical regularity. Coming from a world steeped in the art and architecture of ancient Rome, he saw in the monument's careful shaping and symmetrical plan the hand of a civilized and sophisticated builder. He concluded, in a book published after his death, that this could not possibly be the work of primitive Britons. It must, he argued, have been a Roman temple dedicated to the sky god Caelus, built by the Romans during their occupation of Britain. He dismissed the local stories of Merlin as the fables of a barbarous people. While his conclusions were entirely wrong, his method, based on careful measurement and reasoned analysis, marked the first step away from myth and towards a scientific understanding of the site. A few decades later, the great antiquarian and writer John Aubrey visited the stones and fell under their spell. Unlike Jones, Aubrey was a man who delighted in the ancient British past. He spent countless hours walking the landscape, sketching the monument, and talking to local people. It was Aubrey who first noticed the ring of 56 curious pits just inside the main bank, the features that now bear his name. He correctly surmised that these had once held standing stones or posts that had long since vanished. More importantly, he rejected the Roman theory, arguing that the monument's rough, unpolished finish was utterly unlike the fine masonry of the Romans. He correctly identified it as a pre-Roman, native British temple, and he attributed its construction to the Druids, the powerful priestly class of the Iron Age Celts described by Julius Caesar. This theory, linking Stonehenge to the mysterious white-robed figures of popular imagination, proved to be incredibly powerful and enduring. The Druid theory was enthusiastically championed in the 18th century by another influential antiquarian, William Stukely. A medical doctor and a clergyman, Stukely was a pioneer of field archaeology. He spent his summers meticulously surveying not just Stonehenge itself, but the entire surrounding landscape. He was the first to recognize the cursus for the monumental prehistoric earthwork it was. And he discovered the Stonehenge Avenue, the ceremonial approach that connected the monument to the River Avon. It was Stukely who made the crucial observation that the main axis of Stonehenge was aligned to the summer solstice sunrise, a discovery that proved it was a temple dedicated to the sun. He saw the Druids as a sophisticated philosophical priesthood, the intellectual descendants of the Phoenicians, and he believed Stonehenge was their great cathedral. Stukely's work was a masterful combination of careful fieldwork and romantic imagination. While his attribution to the Druids was incorrect by more than 2,000 years, his solar alignment theory was a monumental leap forward. And his vision of a vast, interconnected ritual landscape set the agenda for all future research. For the next century and a half, the romantic image of the ruin and its supposed druidic priests dominated the public perception. Artists like John Constable and J.M.W. Turner came to paint its majestic, weather-beaten stones under dramatic skies, solidifying its status as a national icon. But the monument itself was suffering. Unprotected and unregulated, it became a popular spot for picnickers and souvenir hunters. Visitors would rent chisels from the local town to chip off pieces of the sacred stones, and parts of the site were even used for grazing sheep. In the year 1900, one of the great sarsen uprights of the outer circle fell, taking its lintel with it. This disaster finally spurred the authorities into action. The site was fenced off, an admission fee was introduced, and the first program of modern scientific restoration and excavation began. The leaning stones were straightened and set in concrete, a process that, while controversial, almost certainly saved the monument from further collapse. This new era of scientific investigation was spearheaded in the mid-20th century by two formidable archaeologists, Richard Atkinson and Stuart Piggott. They conducted the most extensive excavations the site had ever seen, meticulously digging trenches, re-examining the Aubrey holes, and sifting through decades of previous finds. They painstakingly pieced together the three-stage construction sequence that still forms the basis of our understanding today. The initial earthwork, the arrival of the bluestones, and the final erection of the great sarsen structure. But the most revolutionary tool in their arsenal was a technique that had been developed in the aftermath of the Second World War: radiocarbon dating. For the first time, it was possible to take organic materials found at the site, a fragment of antler pick left in a ditch, a piece of charcoal from a post hole, and determine their actual age. The results were a bombshell for the old theories. The radiocarbon dates proved conclusively that Stonehenge was far older than the Druids, older than the Romans, even older than the Mycenaeans of ancient Greece. The first phase of construction, the great earthwork circle, was pushed back to an astonishing 5,000 years ago. The great sarsen stones were raised around 4,500 years ago. This was a purely Neolithic monument, the product of a Stone Age people who had, against all odds, created one of the most sophisticated structures of the ancient world. The late 20th and early 21st centuries brought a host of new scientific techniques that have allowed us to answer questions Stukely and Atkinson could only dream of. Advances in geology and petrology allowed Mike Parker Pearson and his team to trace the bluestones with pinpoint accuracy back to their specific outcrops in the Preseli Hills. The study of stable isotopes in human and animal bones, as seen in the Amesbury Archer and the remains from Durrington Walls, has opened a new window into the lives of the builders, revealing where they came from and what they ate. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry now allow archaeologists to survey the entire landscape without digging a single trench, revealing the faint ghosts of buried structures and helping to reconstruct the full, complex picture of this sacred ground. Each new discovery, each scientific advance, peels back another layer of the mystery, replacing the myths of Merlin and the Druids with a story that is, in its own way, even more magical. The story of a prehistoric people who, with only simple tools and an extraordinary vision, rearranged their world and reached for the stars. And so we return to where we began, to the silent circle of stones standing sentinel on the Salisbury Plain. Our journey has taken us through 5 millennia, from the first mysterious pine posts of the hunter-gatherers to the final, unfinished designs of the Bronze Age. We have walked the ancient landscape when it was marked only by the great earthen cursus, and we have stood within the first sacred circle when it was a gleaming white bank of chalk, a resting place for the cremated dead. We have felt the immense strain of the ropes as thousands of people hauled the magical bluestones from the distant Welsh mountains, and we have heard the relentless, rhythmic chipping of stone hammers as the colossal sarcens were shaped with almost unbelievable precision. We have sat by the hearths of the builders in their bustling winter village at Durrington Walls, a place of wood and feasting for the living, a temporary city whose entire purpose was to create an eternal home for the spirits of the ancestors. We have seen that Stonehenge was not one monument, but many, a sacred stage that was rebuilt and reimagined over 1,000 years, each generation adding its own layer of meaning and ambition. We have learned that it was a temple to the sun and the moon, a vast astronomical clock that marked the turning of the seasons, connecting the cycle of human life to the great cycles of the cosmos. It was a place of pilgrimage that drew people and their offerings from every corner of the island, a vibrant center of a complex and widespread society. It was perhaps a place of healing, where the sound of ringing stones was thought to cure the sick. Above all, it was a profound link between the worlds, a place where the living could commune with the dead, most powerfully at the solemn moment of the midwinter sunset. We have watched as the fantastical stories of Merlin and the Druids, which cloaked the monument for centuries, were carefully peeled away by the patient work of science. The pickaxe and the trowel, the radiocarbon date, and the chemical analysis have replaced the wizard's spell and the druid's sickle, revealing a story far more ancient and, in its own way, far more miraculous, and yet For all that we have learned, the stones still hold their deepest secrets. We have given the builders a name, the grooved ware people, the beaker people, but we do not know what they called themselves. We know the how, but we will never fully know the why. We cannot hear the chants that echoed from the stones, nor can we know the exact prayers that were offered to the winter sunset. The precise grammar of their stone and sun worshipping religion is lost to us forever. What remains is the monument itself, a testament not to a single king or a forgotten empire, but to a collective will, to a belief so powerful it could move mountains. Stonehenge is the ultimate expression of a people's relationship with their world, their ancestors, and the cosmos. It stands as a profound statement about our shared human impulse to seek meaning, to impose order on a chaotic world, and to create something that will outlast us. It reminds us that even in a world without writing, without the wheel, without metal tools, a people can be moved by a faith so compelling that they can reach for the heavens and leave an echo in stone that will never fade.